A podcast team started looking into the biggest hack in history and ended up in the middle of the story. A mysterious voicemail, disappearing files. It got personal. Breach is a new podcast that takes you inside the world's biggest hacks. They set out to answer questions about the hack of a huge American company and found themselves investigating a Russian conspiracy. Subscribe to Breach, Breach, in your podcast app right now. All right, and we're live. Just a quick little pre-roll from a sponsor there. This week's show, Huawei's P20 Pro boasts the best camera ever, according to DxO, but is a triple sensor setup starting to feel like we're marketing men's razor blades. Apple delivers a more powerful iPad for education with a compelling price, but will it be too expensive to accessorize? And OnePlus co-founder Carl Pei says we should all learn to love the notch, but so far most of our readers would seem to disagree. We've got a lot to talk about, so make sure you're charged and ready for episode 298 of the Pocketnow Weekly. Recorded March 30th at noon Pacific, this weekly podcast is where we dissect and discuss those gadgets that make our lives mobile, smartphones, tablets, and wearables. It's all the stuff you wished existed when you were a kid, and MySpace would never have spied on your phone calls. I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, contributing editor at Pocketnow.com, joined as always by plucky podcast producer Mr. Jules Wong out on the East Coast. How's it going, sir?
I don't think I was ever on the MySpace train for any period of time at all. Like, that was before I actually got interested in connecting with people online.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely going to be some proto-social media examinations, histories, the Friendster era, the classmates.com, the MySpace.
I'm going to go to GeoCities and I'm just going to hang out there for the 1996 that was.
All of these things that sort of led us to the current internet apocalypse that we find ourselves in today. But we've got a monster, epic, huge baller show. There was a ton of news this week. Some really exciting stories that we want to get to. And of course, we want to hear from you. If you want to join the conversation during the live broadcast, join us on the Twitters with the hashtag PNWeekly. And if you're listening to the show after the fact, you can still use that traditional email thing. It's an app on your phone or an app on your computer, I'm sure.
We're actually going to be answering emails this show.
Yeah, we've got viewer messages. That's exactly why we want you to join this conversation at podcast@pocketnow.com. Jules, I'm going to turn it over right to you because even though we're actually going to record a slightly longer episode this week, we still have a ton of stuff to get to. So let's get those headlines from pocketnow.com.
All right. Well, let's get to the hardware section first. Plenty of devices that have been released this week. The Huawei P20 and P20 Pro, the Spotlight March 27th event in Paris that has been the subject of everyone's arousal, curiosity, and just amazement, because the P20 Pro in particular has those three cameras that it can wield with up to 63 megapixels of output, they say, or just 63 megapixels, you just stuff them all in, and with the main camera sensor being a monochrome driver 40 megapixel sensor. So it's definitely something to be interested in. DxO Mark has evaluated it with its mobile score of 109 points. And the P20, not a slacker within itself, only having two main cameras on the back, but it manages to score a 102. So, and those have been the highest scores that we have seen so far. More to come, of course. And we move on from there to the Xiaomi Mi Mix 2S. Now, this follows on from the Mi 2, of course, and it has been a very pathfinding series as an exercise in reducing bezels and making it so that people can enjoy more screens. Obviously, in 2018, this is the case with other phones too, not just the Mi Mix 2, but many others from the typical manufacturers. So in order to differentiate it, we'll say, from the competition, it has been able to improve its camera game, dual cameras this time, and DxO Mark has scored it an overall of a 97 with a 101 photo subscore. So that's something to be impressed with for any of those people who like basic metrics and just the basics, I guess, the elements. In terms of Apple and its education events, we have the iPad 9.7, sixth generation. A lot of the same from last generation, except for an update to the chipset, the A10 Fusion chipset, so better graphics, AR processing, and so forth, and compatibility with the Apple Pencil, the stylus that's supposed to well, it's only been compatible with the iPad Pros up until this point. You still have to pay $99 for that, but you get this with the iPad 9.7 at $329 in the US, and it's supposedly the most affordable combination of tablet and stylus that's out there, or at least it's the most affordable iPad that Apple has put out, especially considering that other regions have are seeing this priced below last year's iPads. Not the US, but other regions like Canada and Europe. And finally, as a counter to that, but before that was released, the iPad was released, we're talking about the Acer Chromebook Tab 10, which is the first Chrome OS tablet, bona fide tablet, not convertible 2-in-1 laptop that has a stylus natively and is the same form factor, 9.7-inch screen at the same exact, I guess you could say, retina display going on right there, and yeah, $329. This is definitely a very competitive field that we have going on in the educational tablets area here. So I was just wondering, where should we start here? Because the Huawei P20 is going to be the
Well, it
obvious.
sounds like you already want to start with the P20.
Well, I mean, yeah, I was going back to my first point here. I was just kind of
so instantly, because we've already seen some tweets coming in from the PN Weekly hashtag, people asking for comparisons to the 1020. Of course, we're talking about the P20 Pro, the one that's got the camera sensor. At Fat Produce, really excited to see an ultra high megapixel camera. Or megapixel camera. Yeah, sorry, I messed up my own joke there. I think the exciting thing about the P20 Pro, and one of the reasons why we're seeing some of these higher scores from DxO, isn't the megapixel count. It's the fact that we're finally seeing a phone in 2018 that is including a substantially larger image sensor size. That is going to provide benefits for photography. There's a substantial benefit when you move to a standalone camera and it's got a much bigger image sensor than what.
Yeah, they were having a lot of comparative metrics here. Something like 60% larger than either the S9s or the iPhone 10s sensor. So, like, when you increase the micron sizes and just have more of them in general, that you get more light and more information and more.
And it's not just the number of photo sites. It's the fact that you've got a significantly larger surface area. So, for example, I mean, like, you can look at Panasonic G5S. That's a very video focused micro four thirds camera. It has larger individual photo sites than what you would find on a Nikon D850. But if we're talking about overall image quality, the D850 is still gonna beat the Panasonic, even though it has smaller photo sites. It's because it's got a full frame sensor. It's a larger surface area to play with. You get significantly more photographic and shallower depth of field naturally, not with all of these software tricks. And I think that's one of the things that lends a significant advantage to what Huawei's doing here. And again, why I keep pointing to Huawei is the spiritual successor of classic Nokia. Great partnership with a legit camera manufacturer, willing to take experiments. They've been ahead of the curve on things like software processing and software bokeh blur and manual photography features. This is looking like they're continuing to press their reputation as the photography phone. And I don't see many other manufacturers really stepping up to compete in that conversation.
Well, in terms of the many features that Leica and Huawei do have to offer, I mean, one of them was being able to just offer the option of ISO 102,400, which
Right.
is that's how many stops is that now from the like so okay.
Well,
I'm trying to
again,
remember
this
my
is why
base
I'll be
twos.
curious to see what the actual practical dynamic range of a camera like this is. We've been getting a couple other questions, like Das Otter is asking here with the PN Weekly hashtag is the DxO mark a good benchmark, or are we just approaching a dingle measuring comparison now? I would have said a dongle measuring comparison now. Just keeping it all in the smartphone family. So I find DxO is entirely internally consistent with their testing procedure. I don't believe that they value lifestyle aspects of photography as much as they should, but I've never found fault with their testing protocol. The biggest problem I have with DxO is trying to sum up the entire experience of using a camera under a one number score. So even though the
Yeah.
P20 Pro scores the highest score possible in the single score benchmark, the single grade benchmark, it might have deficiencies in an area that you value. And an iPhone 10 might be the right fit for you, depending on how you like to shoot and what you like to shoot. So it's substantially more valuable. It's incredibly important that if you're trying to glean from DxO mark scores what you think you're going to like, that you actually
Yeah, you
go
have to
through their
really dig
reviews.
into the sub scores
You have
and
to
see.
dig into their sub scores.
Yeah, yeah, and it's important to point out that they have rejiggered the mobile scale,
Yeah.
including like bokeh and a couple of other things, into their considerations. I don't think that's enough bias towards more
No.
consumer-focused features and whatnot that they would like to include in their testing. But I mean, it's a good, it's basics, and it's
And
very elemental. It's nice.
I'm glad to see that they did recalculate some of their scoring, because I feel like when we were in the first generation Pixel era, they seemed to be very impressed with post processing imagery, while they also missed some substantial problems with lens manufacturing. You know,
Mhm.
so I feel like we're seeing a company that is approaching this conversation with a little bit more nuance. I still feel that they miss a couple aspects of the feel, the operation, the integration, the ergonomics of using a particular piece of gadgetry, because all of that really does play into the overall photography experience. But that being said, I feel that they are entirely internally consistent, and I feel they are a reliable resource once you get away from the final grade. Once you actually dig into all of the sub review bullet points that they've got, I think you walk away with a much better understanding of what it is they are testing for.
Now, I'm not exactly sure how this actually compares with the Lumia 1020. Obviously, just on like the aggregate, we're dealing with well, actually, I'm not sure because I didn't get to read that part of the spec sheet. I was focused more on the Huawei P20. We delegated a lot of the coverage between me and Adrian, but I never got to see like the whole P20 Pros like mass and whatnot, as compared at least to the Lumia 1020, which was a third or one over 2.6.
The 1020 image sensor size was a 2/3 inch. It was a 1 over 1.7.
1 over
So it was
2.7.
it was it was ever so slightly smaller than the 808, and like 100% bigger than most of the other phones of its time, which had third inch sensors.
All right, I'm gonna look it up, but like talk about just between the multiple like responsibilities of these sensors and whether or not these all these sensors are duly equipped to do their jobs,
Well,
given
yeah,
their
we
sensor
have a lot
sizes.
of definitely. We have a lot of metaphors that we can point to in the world of photography. I mean, I recently went back on my personal channel and did a comparison between the Lumia 1020 and the Huawei Mate 10 Pro. And what we've seen over, 4 years of phone manufacturing is a lot of the lifestyle aspects of capturing images and capturing video have gotten so much more fluid. They are so much easier for people to interact with. And that's what's impressive about capturing images with a modern smartphone. Burst rates, individual captures, logging raw files, really big chunks of data that are processed incredibly fast. But that still means that there were these opportunities where a Lumia 1020, even though it was ridiculously slow, was still able to outperform newer cameras today. I did a low light test, just capturing the raw file in sort of dark in office lighting. And the 1020 is more than capable of hanging with 1/3 inch and 1/2.5 inch, not quite half inch image sensors. We haven't seen another phone from that era which can in any way, shape, or form compete with modern phones today. And you compare it to a device which came out shortly after, like the Galaxy S5, and the performance is abysmal compared to what the 1020 could achieve. So I always likened the 1020 to being the medium format version of a smartphone. Medium format is a type of image sensor in professional photography, which is larger than 35 millimeter. It's larger than a full frame camera sensor. But because that surface area is so much larger, they're typically not the best at clearing information off of the sensor as quickly. So you see them a lot in studio, portraiture, very controlled environments. You're not going to see a Hasselblad out on, a football field. You're not going to see someone shooting burst medium format shots to try and capture fast action. And if consumers really want the differences for that big size sensor, I think one of the best examples of going up in sensor size, as an example, would be looking at the photography or the cinematography in the film The Dark Knight, the Batman film with the Joker, because most of that film is shot in 35 millimeter, but then we see a bunch of sections, especially some really intense action sequences, which were shot in 70 millimeter IMAX photography. It was one of the things Nolan did, which was really impressive. It wasn't that he shot 70 millimeter for the easy stuff. He shot 70 millimeter for the hard stuff. And you can see a remarkable difference in how that stuff is framed, in how that the depth of field, the focus, everything sort of melts in a completely different way than 35 millimeter photography. Now, getting back to phones, that's what's exciting about watching a company step up here, is because we're getting this substantially larger image sensor. It should have much more surface area to pick up low light in low light situations. It should provide a nicer, softer background blur for your bokeh and more natural fall off, so you don't have as long a depth of field. And then you weigh all that up with modern processors. You weigh that up with modern processing, and hopefully we've eliminated some of those pain points that we had with the Lumia 1020, where you would hit the shutter, you would capture the shot, and then you'd have like a 3-second recycle time before you could take another photo. That's what will bring some excitement to this space from the photography perspective. I think a lot of consumers are going to look at this versus a Galaxy S9 Plus and say the S9 Plus is fine. It's good enough. It does what I need it to do. NBD. But if you do care about the natural quality of light capture coming off of your chosen permanent companion camera, the thing that's bolted onto the back of your phone, and that it no longer comes with that huge Oreo disc that the 1020 had bulging out the back of the phone, then this is potentially a very exciting move for enthusiasts. Probably gonna pass by most consumers, and it's also called the Pro. It's got a higher price tag. It's gonna scare away some people. But if you're really interested in capturing the best possible image you can from your phone, I think Huawei has just made a phenomenal argument for why you should consider their products.
Indeed. I mean, the Lumia 1020 was even ahead, like not just for the component reasons, but for the actual discourse, where the best camera smartphone or like on a smartphone that you can have is something that you would want anyways in a more, I mean, they weren't that great back in 2013, 2012.
Oh, no.
So, just having all those megapixels to work with at the very least, you would be able to, live your life a little bit better knowing that, hey, at least I can see my kids from far away at that audition or whatever the heck that they're at.
Especially our international viewers, Nokia fans, they got it. Even from the N8, they were already working with substantially larger image sensors than their competition. And if it hadn't been for Nokia rejoining the United States under the Lumia brand, I don't think that we would have seen the massive. There was a tectonic shift in performance from the Galaxy Note 3 to the Galaxy Note 4. I think Samsung and Apple really started taking that stuff seriously when we saw what even like a lowly Lumia 920 could do, let alone what the 1520 and the 1020 were all coming out with these really groundbreaking features, many of which are still not on our devices today, like surround sound audio capture, 4K video recording on Qualcomm 800 series chipsets. I mean, they were so far ahead of the curve on so many of these points, and we've been kind of treading water
Yeah,
since the
well,
Lumia 1020.
some of that is kind of a Moore-esque, not necessarily Moore's law, but Moore-esque in terms of, well, we saw major advancements through S4 through up to the 800, 801 series. And then things started to trail off just because, people were starting working on dies. And I think we're on our second generation 10 nanometer processes at this point, which, given how the rest of the software system ecosystems have evolved, it's just like, well, we're just trying to push out as much refinement and as much, like little performance whatevers, like little nuggets that we can. So with
I do
all
have
of
one
that,
last question here before we move on to the next topic, because we probably should move on. Huawei, we love you, but we've been talking about you for a bit here. This is from Rohit Naik. I've probably mispronounced your name. Does having a bigger sensor make things better, or is it that the optics have an important role to play in overall image quality in smartphones? Optics are critically important. The quality of the glass that lets light in to hit the sensor is very important. But and I mentioned this in my personal Lumia 1020 versus Mate 10 Pro video. If you look at a smartphone with an aperture of f1.8, you have to take into account how tiny that image sensor is. So if you compare that against a consumer grade DSLR, an APS-C sensor like a Canon Rebel, what the Rebel produces at f10 to f13 looks very much like what the smartphone produces at f1.8. Again, as the most critical component in improving photography, improving image quality is the sensor size. The bigger the sensor gets, the more photographic and cinematic our images get, because we start getting to play with other aspects of light acquisition and aperture size, depth of field, and all the other goodies that come with having that extra real estate.
So with that last point made, let's transition over to the Xiaomi Mi Mix 2S for just a second. I'm just wondering where this device is and where the device series is in this point in the conversation, where things have evolved to 2x1 displays or even taller displays, and they're covering more of the fascia of the device. And now it's like, okay, so the Mi Mix, very pioneering in its time, but that time was short-lived, and now it's trying to iterate beyond what it already is. I mean, we're still dealing with generally okay, like very thin bezels except for the chin below. And people even want that gone. So is this just the camera phone at this point? Is this just the camera upgrade that it needs?
No, I think this is still, I think Xiaomi has made a good faith argument for being the out-appling Apple Android device, right? Because we're going to be talking about notches and stuff, and how there are a lot of companies that are copying some of these terrible bad ideas, but doing it directly. And I think Xiaomi looked at, well, what are some of the pain points involved in trying to make the bezel framing the screen as absolutely thin as possible? We need to cut into the screen. Where do we need to cut into the screen? That one question instantly delineates the Mi Mix 2 from the rest of the competition, which is going to just copy the center cut notch that we see.
Because it almost seems like it was bought in that, okay, we're going to move everything down to the below section instead of having it on the typical kind of, center up facing thing.
But that
now that does mean...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was just going to say the bone conduction technology for the earpiece is going to have to be a thing. And, depending on how you feel about like having people listen in on your conversations, it's, it's innovative, but it's also not perfect.
But I mean, we've been doing that since the Kyocera Brigadier. It actually works a lot better than you would think it would. And tissue conduction can actually help minimize some of the impact on just farting your phone call audio out. Because how many times have you been out in public and you see people on a video call or on a speakerphone call, and bone conduction, tissue conduction actually does provide an extra point of audio contact that even a speakerphone can't. So I've been a big fan of that tech in phones. I'm constantly surprised that more companies haven't taken advantage of this. If we care about this forehead bezel having too much stuff, then we can move some of those components center screen And that is a benefit to consumers. It's not a compromise. It makes the phone call experience better. So, like when I want to see change, I don't want to see change for change's sake. I want to see change because it's an improvement. And because of the way that they ask those questions on where can we put some of these components, immediately they win the discussion on the design above the companies that are just copying Apple. Instantly, I want to give them a huge thumbs up for trying to find a different conclusion to the same questions that Apple and all of these other companies are asking. Where do we put this stuff if we have to make the entire front face of this phone all screen? And I think Xiaomi came up with a far more elegant solution than the world's number 2 smartphone manufacturer could.
And I think people might be able to live with the fact that or with the theory that if Xiaomi were to implement some sort of advanced 3D scanning feature like the true depth camera, that maybe if it were placed on the bottom, they wouldn't mind it as much anyways, just because it's not intrusive. There is the fact that, it's not in the optimal position. You'd have to hold it a little bit weirdly for selfies and whatnot in order to avoid nose shots. But I mean, it's fair enough. I mean,
or you just train the phone to scan for your nose.
They're just nostril scanning on the new.
It's like
Xiaomi.
They always have that guide image of like a sphere or your head and like how you're supposed to train the phone. And instead, they give you the outline, match up your nostrils with the model.
That's the one thing that won't change from when you are born.
We also call it grandma video call view.
Oh, hell. So are we supposed to tilt the screen back a little bit more or forward? I'm not sure. And then why? I can only see your trousers, grandma. I'm sorry.
It only works when you're also backlit from like a bright sunny day out the window. I love it. No, I'm completely being earnest because we're going to be talking about notch stuff more. I hate watching companies arrive. The companies that didn't ask, how could we do it better? They're just looking at how they did it the same. And I don't believe it brings any benefits, but we'll expand on that more when we get to OnePlus discussion.
Yeah, indeed. And I guess we could just lump both of these together here. So, well, actually,
no, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, we should probably detail. We've got the Apple's refreshed entry,
because I already just said it in the freaking summary, and there's not much to write home about beyond that.
No, this is actually something I just want to throw out to our viewers, and if we get some good comments on it, we'll read it now, or if we get some good emails from you folks, we'll use that for future broadcast. But we're watching the education market in a visceral 3-way fight. Microsoft hasn't properly joined this conversation yet, but we're seeing some really compelling hardware with Windows 10 running on ARM. Chromebook is a phenomenal bang for buck platform. Very few compromises for the education market, very well represented. And now that they can use Android apps, this doesn't feel like quite as limited a platform when it was more just, we're going to put a web browser into a laptop shell and that's all you really need. My fear, because Apple needs a good solution to reach consumers. And while I think their branding is regressive and hideously insulting to teenagers, a little girl running around with an iPad going, "What's a computer?"
I thought we were over that. I'm
still not over that. I think about that ad and it makes me bristle with anger every single time. But Apple needs a good option to join that conversation. They can't do it with OS X. There is no MacBook which joins this conversation well. It only makes sense to try and fight this fight with iPad. $299 is a good price for a baller, powerful iPad. But my fear is they've priced themselves out because of the accessories. If you buy a $300 Chromebook,
$299?
If you buy a $300 Chromebook, you get a $300 laptop grade. You don't need anything else. If you buy a $300 iPad, you kind of still do need a keyboard and you might need a pencil, but you also might need a mouse or something else. So best case scenario.
No, you have to get the pencil. It's the new compatibility of this season. It's hot, it's fresh, and you can.
I got to tell you,
it's amazing.
for Newegg, we shot a whole segment on mobile content production, not this last week's episode, but the week before. Android works so well with a Bluetooth mouse. I can't tell you, like, it's so silly connecting it to my phone, but it works
The little
really
things. Yeah,
well. So, you know,
I agree.
I'd be fine. I'd be fine using an iPad with a mouse, but even with the keyboard, you're talking about a 30 to 50% price increase over the competition. And I feel that largely takes Apple out of many middle and lower middle class communities across the country. So I'd really be curious to hear what our viewers have to say about that, when in the same week we got this amazing news from an all slate Chrome OS device. Android for tablets hasn't been particularly inspiring. There's a point, I'm getting to a point where I think I'd even want to see Chrome on a phone. But Acer going Chrome for a slate for education, this is a great idea, IMO. And comes in below Apple's price point, is a perfectly capable machine. Once you accessorize it, we're kind of back up into nicer Chromebook territory. I mean, this to me looks like a much better fit for a majority of school districts, public school districts out there. And I'd be curious to see what our viewers and listeners have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, even if Android is still kind of a hack onto Chrome OS, I mean, that still has the apps for stylus driven output, and it definitely still works. Even so, and 329, you get the stylus with it. Take notes, Apple.
and it's got a silo for the stylus. Like, there's a hole in the tablet where the stylus goes, so what, you don't lose it.
You don't, It's better for those like fleet purchasers to like have and like be able to take account of all the kids, the naughty little kids that stick their styluses up their noses and whatnot.
But even to the same token, and to your point, there is, if you're in charge of a school district, and I hope our viewers will chime in on this, do you look at this priced for classrooms $300 Chromebook tablet, or do you look at the ecosystem of Chromebooks and see that there are some $200 and $300 full clamshell laptop style solutions also available? And again, we want to find those solutions that actually properly equip students to get their work done. So I'll be curious to see what our fans have to say.
And if you do want to go with the iPad route, like, are you going to be able to make it so give them the full experience, the full full abilities with the $500 per student investment that
because
you have to
know there are some school districts that will absolutely pull the trigger on that, but we suffered a pretty embarrassing crash and burn here at LA Unified. The LA school districts out here tried to front this iPad initiative, and it did not work in the most spectacularly embarrassing way ever. So there's huge room. There is, like, the general consumer market is pretty well baked. Apple, Microsoft, Google. Everyone sort of has their team. Everyone's picked their side. But what we're talking about is educating the next generation of consumers, and in part, educating them on how to be consumers. And if they're going to spend their childhood and formative years on a Chromebook, doesn't that make them more likely to be sort of invested into the Google ecosystem by the time that they're adults? Same thing Microsoft, same thing Apple. So this is a huge fight, which doesn't have a clear leader right now. And I totally understand why all three companies are fighting massively for some kind of mind share, some kind of toehold to really start building some momentum with school districts.
Indeed. So lots of battles to be had over the next several weeks and months to come in terms of that. But not only that, also just the Chinese outlook on the U.S. and what they'll be able to offer in the U.S. just because, well, a lot of them are being fingered for cybersecurity threats. We'll get into that in just a few minutes. But until then, we'd like to take a moment here and talk about our sponsor.
Yes. This week, Google Cloud Platform. What can your data tell you? With the Google Cloud Platform, use machine learning at scale to build better products. Google Cloud's AI provides modern machine learning services with pre-trained models and a service to generate your own tailored models. Our platform is now available as a cloud service to bring unmatched scale and speed to your business applications. It predicts so your business can thrive. Click now to learn more about Google Cloud Platform or go to g.co/getcloudai. And we thank them for supporting the Pocketnow Weekly.
And we it's like a little rubber ball, medicine ball that goes blam. I don't know. I don't know how to come from that. How about we talk about some news, more news, lots of other newsy news things. I guess. Yeah, it is. I'll have to freestyle it since the oh boy, but I wasn't able to write scripts for all of these things. Okay. Let's go for it though. Yeah, ready?
Do it.
Okay. For the week of March 26, 2018, this is all the news that is fit to podcast. This week, it was revealed by some Facebook leavers who have been disgusted with the outlook of the Cambridge Analytica scandal that Facebook has been storing metadata of all the calls and SMS from Android phones the past several years, and Facebook says that's completely legal and that it is able to do so because users actually gave their permission for it. But there's some misleading going on here because first of all, the Facebook app for Android has been targeted for the longest time to the lowest, the earliest version possible, and it was back then that permissions were looser and they didn't have to be brought up by prompt to the user at the time of request. So most users didn't really figure that this was happening. And there was also some wording where in terms of the permission slate that Facebook gave to users of Facebook Messenger and Facebook Lite, saying that only their contacts would be continuously synced. And there was some different text saying on other phones that, that contacts or contact data would be continuously uploaded. And there's a whole bunch of reading that we can get into that in just a few minutes. So hang tight. In the meantime, Oracle has won its appeal against Google in its long-standing case for claims of infringement of Google just moving whole bunches of code from Java into Android for their development. Google has long claimed that this has been a fair use exercise, but apparently now we're going to have to see how much in terms of damages that Google will be able to will have to pay up. Oracle has been asking for about $9 billion. Which was a year's worth of profits from Android plus $1 billion. So we'll have to see about that as that case rolls along. And several cases that have been rolling along since the late end of last year is and still continues to be the iPhone throttling lawsuits. You may remember back late last year that Apple confessed and apologized for not disclosing its practices explicitly in the software updates that triggered this throttling behavior. But that has amounted to 59 class action lawsuits against the company for that failure of disclosure in the first place. And according to the Wall Street Journal, there will be a possibility for those 59 class actions to eventually merge into one huge one, and the process could take years overall to hack through. So definitely something that we should keep an eye on, especially as this issue gets put to bed in terms of new hardware, new software. Going over to Foxconn, it has announced that it has acquired, or excuse me, it has not announced, but it was reported that it acquired Belkin, the peripherals manufacturer that also owns the brands Linksys in terms of wireless communication equipment, and Wemo, and a couple of other smart home brands as well. The purchase price was nearly $900 million. and the cements Foxconn's position as Apple's biggest partner. It was already the world's largest contract electronics assembly manufacturer, and now it could be working into, well, it already had owned Sharp for a time, being, as the Japanese display manufacturer can attest. But this is going to be interesting in terms of the future of iPad accessories, iPhone accessories, etc. Moving on to our one of the big points of contention this week is the OnePlus 6, and co-founder Carl Pei talking with The Verge about how its fans, the company's fans, should learn to love the notch. And it's been a hell of a time trying to see how this has been going on in terms of the fan reaction. It's just a whole bunch of complaints and visceral insults being thrown. In terms of LG, they seem to have handled this in a more classic way, or at least found a way to do so without too much damage to their brand. They haven't leaked too much in terms of the G7, and there hasn't been much consumer excitement about that, but they actually made a thread on the Android subreddit and asked for some responses to that, and they got higher quality conversations going on over there. So there's that. There's all the news. I survived that somehow. Let's start back over in Facebook land, because of course, it's been the punching bag for, and rightly so, for a lot of privacy and security hawks out there.
Yeah, and deservedly. Sorry, I'm trying to get back. There it is. I'm trying to get out of screen share. There we go.
Hello.
Sorry,
There we go.
Surprisingly took me a little bit longer than it should have. No, I don't think I'm alone in being one of the people who's very glad that this is going down the way it is. The current state of social media, of making new services, making new apps for consumers to interact with, this is going to be the next major shift, I believe, in services. Is you make something cool, you find some kind of traction with a certain type of audience, you have your IPO, then you need to start making money, and you start cramming either ads or business practices which feel kind of nefarious into the mix. And Facebook will hopefully show other people coming up in the space that that's maybe not the best way to go about conducting business with consumers anymore. So I hope that this unraveling is public, is takedown, that people understand the value of their information, the value of their data, and that we can now start having, because I kind of feel like up and coming consumers, millennials and younger, are going to have a much better sense of what all this stuff is worth, and they're going to have a different perspective on valuing their privacy than our generation and older, or my generation and older, do. Because right now, especially with the current lawmakers that we have in place, a lot of the stuff is just the frivolousness of social media, and they don't take the actual impact of social media and online shopping very seriously. So that's why we need to have some of these changes, and they need to be changes of substance. So Facebook has earned all of the ill will that they're currently generating. Now what's left to be seen is whether or not companies and brands and consumers actually follow through on changing their behavior. Right now, it kind of feels a little like a very specific South Park episode of the "we're sorry we got caughtness" of Facebook's current discussions. A couple class action lawsuits where maybe Facebook has to pay $1 million fine or something like that. It really isn't going to amount to much change. But if we start to see any move towards consumers pulling the plug on their Facebook accounts or their Facebook services, we start to see a significant shift in ad revenue from brands that are feeling pretty slighted right now. Like you're not really getting the same bang for buck that you used to on Facebook, even for how wildly extortionist Facebook policies are with the people who like
I mean,
your services. That's
well, it
really where
makes
I need
sense.
to
All that data
tell
is
you where the
free.
needle
All that
moves.
user data is free to them. So,
Oh no,
I
what I mean
mean,
is
it
like
really
at the beginning
depends.
of the year, we saw a significant drop off in brand interactions through Facebook because of some of the issues facing them with the Russia
Yeah.
investigations. So Facebook's business model is you set up a brand page and people like your brand page. Now, the people who's liked your brand page, that's like subscribing to your brand page, but none of them get to see your post unless you pay Facebook to reach the people who have already liked your brand. Now, with the recent focuses on shifting over the model towards more family and friends content, you're getting even less for your money in trying to reach the people who are already subscribed to your Facebook page, let alone trying to reach out and find new viewers, new users, new consumers to take part with what you post on Facebook. So that's what I mean is like there's already a growing sentiment around companies that now's the time to stop putting all your eggs in the Facebook basket. You already weren't making a great return on your investment, and now it's gotten even worse.
So, staying in the same sandlot, but just in a different corner, focusing explicitly on that Android vulnerable, I guess some would consider it a vulnerability, but like in terms of just the yapping about it, saying that iOS never really allowed this kind of background siphoning to happen, and Google is just trying to play catch up in terms of well, it started to limit Play Store API targeting so that older versions can't be developers can't write apps for older versions of Android.
Right.
Like, what do you think that kind of conversation leads us? Because it might be one of the like niggling factors in the head when
Mhm.
it comes to consumers buying their next smartphone, but right now it doesn't. Like, I don't see it making a big sway.
Well, yeah, no. This is again, this is why I keep coming back to what is it gonna take to appreciably move the needle on consumer behavior? And I don't think we've found that pain point yet. Right now, we're in a conversation where I think general consumers are starting to get the idea that companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon traffic and user data in a very different way than Apple does. Apple still utilizes the information that they have access to you, the information that they have on you in a way to offer up products and services or music recommendations, things that still generate income. But the core of their business model, and this is also one of the reasons why, an Apple product likely has a contributing reason, not the main reason, but a contributing reason as to why there's a bit more of a profit padding built into an iOS product as opposed to a competitor's product, a bit more headroom there, is because they're likely not making as much money on the back end data analytics on each of their customers. So I do believe Apple still has a good faith argument to make in that arena when it comes to consumer privacy, its consumer behavior, and interacting with that information. This is something that I feel like we're going to have to have a cultural shift in the regulatory agencies that are tasked with protecting us even from our own desired behaviors. It feels good to be connected. Dopamine hits when you get, likes and responses, and you get into Twitter arguments or Facebook debates. All of these things are highly addictive mechanisms. At least according to the human brain, it sees little difference from the researchers that I've talked to. That or is compared to like playing blackjack or hitting a slot machine. So it's going to take a while before the rational side of the consumer space really starts to say, we don't like what Amazon does with our information, or we really don't like how Facebook handles our privacy, or Google might have too many holes for me to want to do business with them on a future product. Right now, everything's too tribal. So if you're team Alexa versus team, Google Assistant, then you're just going to keep supporting the team that you're already a member of. If you're Team Galaxy and there's no way you'd ever own an iPhone, well, you're not really rationally considering your options for not only the device that's in your pocket, but all of the services that have access to the wealth of information and behavior on you. And that's worth talking about. Not necessarily that you're going to switch teams, but at least to understand what your potential risk might be with any given manufacturer.
Yeah, I mean, Apple, for its part, it says that, I mean, it encrypts, both ways and whatnot for all the data that you send to it, and regarding your Apple Music service or your iCloud Drive account or whatever the heck.
Well,
But
see,
you're still sending it to one centralized source,
that's
and
just
that
it.
in itself.
Exactly. Because we can talk about encryption, so you can't intercept the information, but I don't know that consumers fully understand that if there's an investigation and they've been utilizing the iCloud, then Apple has to make a good faith effort to work with law enforcement to give them information that's on their servers. So, again, it's I don't feel these companies have done their due diligence in educating their consumers as to how pervasive these services are and what the potential for disclosure might be in regards to how some of these services have been used. But this also means that there's going to be an opportunity for someone to come in as a disruptor. In the desktop space, I've been happy on the Firefox browser. I actually went back to Firefox about 2 years ago, and it was sort of part-timing both Firefox and Chrome. And now one of the things that I really like, and I hope that we see the same kind of Chrome add-on, is Mozilla created their own Facebook sandbox plugin.
Hmm.
So they log you out of every cookie and tracker from Facebook in the Firefox browser. And when you open Facebook, it stays in its own self-contained bucket so that it can't scrape any other user data from your other browsing habits. And I want to see that extended to everybody. I don't sign into Google Chrome on my phone. I just haven't had this burning need to link browsers across every single glowing rectangle that I interact with. And most of what I do is just sort of search anyway, and Google's really good at that. So I don't really bookmark things like I used to. So if I could sandbox Google from itself, from the rest of Android, I'd be happy, especially Amazon too. I would love to have a way to completely sever my behavior from Amazon, because it is really creepy when certain aspects, like something completely unrelated to my shopping on Amazon will then start to populate purchasing recommendations on Amazon. And again, it takes a lot for a user to unravel how those cookies are implemented and how you can separate yourself from that kind of browsing. I don't want to have to do everything in incognito creeper porn mode. I'd rather have my accounts logged in very specific ways so that then I can control the flow of information to each individual service. I don't think all consumers are going to be that granular in how they want to approach this stuff, but a couple better auto mod tools would be a huge benefit for people who are generally starting to become better educated as to how their data can be compromised.
No, they're not as much as granular as they are glass, just melted and whatnot. I just want it,
right now,
flat, straight. But, as a
blob of user data everywhere you go.
And it's convenience, and it's, just resigning yourself to the fact that data is data. It's going to be out there. It's being traded freely. And at some point, I think that, the fact that privacy as a concept is just going to flow by the wayside. And
I agree with you, but the thing that I hope that we don't lose sight of, and this is something that I think Americans will care about, I think they'll care less about their privacy than they will about the potential value. When a consumer figures out that their behavior, their usage, and their information contributes value to Facebook that they don't necessarily get a return on, that's actually something that I think is worth joining the conversation on. It's the same
as a
thing.
transactional chip. Yeah,
exactly. YouTube demonetizes your video, but it's still a benefit and it still enriches the YouTube platform. Well, why do you want to work for Google for free in making their platform better? Why not go somewhere else that's going to value your contribution as a content creator And you can build your own tools for trying to monetize your traffic. Those types of conversations matter to these mega platforms, because we think of Google, Facebook, Amazon as institutions, but and whenever the market gets a little complacent, whenever we get sort of an oligopoly where there's only a handful of players at the top, that is a dangerous place for a company that's no longer going to innovate, but is instead just going to try and profit off of the investment that they've made. Because a disruptor can come in and show people a different way to go about doing business. And that's left numerous companies ill prepared for a future where their products or their offerings don't quite spark the same amount of imagination. In this current internet space, that evolution happens fast. I mean, look at the difference between Snapchat and Instagram over the last 3 years. That's not a lot of time for two companies to be fighting this hard, and for one to completely, throw away most of their user goodwill.
Yeah. So, speaking of user goodwill, I think how we're going to tackle this next topic as general, in general, is that I'll just go through the first two stories here just a little bit, and then we'll transition immediately into one of the listener mails, because like this,
Okay. Yeah,
these just roll into one point here. So, with OnePlus just trying to survive in the massive sea of leaks and clickbait, as Carl Pei says, clickbait articles talking about these leaks. He generated some noise about his own company, just by that users should learn to love the notch. Now, I understand they're continuing to be that aspiring company that wants to be in the mainstream, and where like the Apple iPhone 10 is kind of the thing, and it's accepted and whatnot, but not in its current state, where the tech enthusiasts are like, no, aesthetics suck, and it doesn't provide as much value as you think to us. Listen to us, please. Do not ignore us. And from like the freaking discourse on this is kind of just toxic, but the same point is made, and it's very, very clear. Let me just give us a couple examples here, because Carl Pei deleted his tweet. So we have this one from Shivang Joshi. Hey, Carl Pei at Get Paid. I think you have deleted your tweet about the notch. I just want to know why. You trolled Xiaomi when they deleted their tweet of the poll of users preferring pure Android to MIUI. So you should probably clarify this. And I love technology, so I ain't biased towards different companies. You got this one from Marina Out. Learn to love the notch. Your company is a small fry in the smartphone industry, Carl Pei. You should try listening to your audience. And then there was this one. I don't know if you had the article up, for the one that I sent, but if you can pull that back up. And yeah, there it is. It's from Guido Van Doom. The only acceptable reason for a notch on a OnePlus 6 would be a bottle opener. So, I mean, it depends on what kind of utility you're actually looking for in that design, but
totally. So, I mean, obviously, with the iPhone 10 being the only way to make a phone, I realize we have been woefully inadequately serving our audience. So from now on, I'm going to do iPhone 10 view with my video streams, because this is really how people want to look at video content on displays. So this looks great to me. Is cutting into the screen and cutting into the display to make sure that you can put on a slightly better web camera.
Don't you have software to block that off? Like to make sure that doesn't take up the whole thing.
If I just want to make the entire side to that point black, well, that's better too.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's still cutting into the screen, and it's basically kind of the same thing as like the megapixel war. So actually, I'm going to go back, because I kind of like the Punisher, the bat ears, having those little winglets. That now we can count that as being part of the screen. So like the little ear here at the top, that still counts according to Apple as part of your usable display area. And that's why it's a 19.5 by 9 aspect ratio screen. So even though it's a 5.8-inch screen, it's still got way less surface, not way less, it's still got less surface area than the 5.5-inch screen on the iPhone 8 Plus. But this is still usable. This is still totally usable. This right here, you can still use it.
Quote unquote,
so we're
usable.
not cheating.
Yeah.
No. We're not lying when we say it's a 19.5 by 9 aspect ratio display.
Well, all right. So like all the hatred, like I know, but isn't the argument still that 16 by 9 content is going to, which like is the mass, the majority of what we consume these days, still going to be just fine on these screens?
Well, no, that is part of the problem. Is if you use the full display from Apple's perspective, if you use the full display, then it cuts into using the full display. If these companies
is that what
would, what's that?
Because well, just from a resolution perspective, like if like it's 1080 wide, just like if you fill it from the bottom in 1920, it should only reach the notch anyways. Like what, and you're getting the same resolution
but that's just it. Is when we're talking about media consumption, we're only talking about 16 by 9 video. If you watch a feature film on your phone, that's usually 2.35. You know, it's even wider than it's even skinnier than the aspect ratio of your phone screen. So it would take up the full length of your screen and still give you letterboxing on top, but on one side, because the screen's asymmetrical. And we love asymmetry. Like I could put a notch over here too, but why? Why? Because this is great having part of one side of the screen completely chopped into.
So you mentioning that, like if you want to bring it up, because like one of the things that people have been imagining about the HTC U12 Plus is that, you know, they could do double notches for the boom sound.
Totally. And that would also be terrible design.
It would be terrible design, but great. Yes.
The main point that I'm getting to, one, the asymmetry does bother me, but two, until we come up with another metaphor for interacting with data and services, the most important aspect of phone design is the screen through which we interact with our data. That is the portal through which a majority of our interactions take place, a majority of our content is consumed, and cutting into that portal to deliver a better web camera is bad design. Now, we can minimize some of the impact on that in different ways. You know, we're looking at some of the test mock-ups, something like the P20 having just like a total strip so that that's dead space, and we really just created a digital bezel, and that's fine. But why go through these shenanigans to create a digital bezel space when we could have just put a bezel at the top of the phone? It also is frustrating because we start talking about an all-screen device that's not necessarily the best for the ergonomics on things like your keyboard. I'm not impressed by people who complain about the dead space underneath the iPhone X keyboard. You don't want the keyboard all the way down at the bottom chin. And for me, I really don't want 6-inch 2:1 aspect ratio screens with no space at the bottom for my navigation controls. I don't like having to reach my thumb down to a tiny bezel-less edge, balancing a top-heavy device to try and interact with that as a daily driver device. I don't think that's good ergonomics, and especially with an all-screen, all-glass, almost no bezel device, these things are going to be more fragile. There's less impact zone for these devices as you go about and you abuse them during your daily life. So
doesn't that redefine the concept of usable space on a display? Like because the phone
has to make digital bezels for you. So you don't really get that space in a bunch of usage scenarios, and you lose some of your space if the apps coded for a notch screened phone will cut the content around the notch. So there's some apps and some games which haven't, you know, totally made that migration over to iPhone X understanding, and so you lose a piece of that app, you lose a piece of that game. It interrupts what should just be a fluid visual aesthetic or a seamless visual design.
Okay, so I get your opinion about the notch, and I get everything that's going on about it. But in terms of
We can even do more notch. See, more notch is
Oh
better. If
boy.
Apple did some notch, we should do even more notch. And that's how you out Apple. You don't ask different questions like Xiaomi did. You don't try and find a different solution. You just do the same thing. And that's how competition works.
No.
That's how you make a good product.
Here's innovation. You make the notch into a full bar and just have two screens on each side, and that's going to be its new form factor. Like that. I mean, that's innovation right there.
What's funny is because what you described is you just cut across the entire screen and you just have a forehead bezel like Samsung did. Funny, that seems to work really well. Who'd have thought?
I want if it were two displays, maybe this could be the Axon M, like the next gen prototype.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I've gotten really cranky about that too. When we see some of the amazing work being done on augmented reality, by the time we get a good consumer durable practical example of a folding or rollout display, it'll already be obsolete. When you see some
But
of the that even like Leap Motion has been doing, and one of these other developers who did on consumer grade hardware. It wasn't like it was being run off a workstation, but just like normal everyday computing stuff off a laptop, and he was able to track his hand and pull out an interface which docked to his hand and was rendered in real time.
yeah.
I'm not impressed with the current metaphor that we have for phones. I look at this as just being the epitome of laziness. Companies who aren't really challenging themselves to come up with better solutions than their competition. And this metaphor is quickly going to become obsolete in the face of Terminator Vision style solutions. And we see
Oh my god, the
major
eye
companies,
bezels that I'm going to see,
right?
the
You're like,
freaking
oh
field of
no,
vision.
I'll have to add a picture frame to my worldview just so
Yeah,
that I can feel like I'm using a phone again, because that's what
indeed.
makes things better. But when you look at a
But
major
going back,
corporation like Intel getting into the ergonomics and the usage of augmented reality glasses, that's serious, dangerous competition for a company like Huawei or Samsung or any of these other smartphone manufacturers. Because then we're not staring at their little picture frame portal into the internet. We're letting Intel beam that stuff directly into the back of our optic nerve. I don't even have to look at the Huawei branding on the front of my phone anymore. It's just the information I want is freely, cleanly displayed right in my field of view, right in my vision. And that's way less disruptive, way less distracting, and far more accessible than anything we could do with a foldable, rollable, transparent, pocketable smartphone device. That's going to be the future.
but going back into 2018 times and just talking about OnePlus, I mean, they so obviously for the right audience and the right kind of company, this was a failure in terms of the discussion of the notch. But how do you think LG handled it? Because I
So
read it a little bit. Yeah.
LG certainly handled the discussion way more gracefully, tremendously more gracefully. But now the danger is so Carl Pei isn't completely wrong in that a bunch of companies are just going to copy Apple and consumers are going to have to deal with it. Because what if you're a OnePlus fan? Are you going to go get another phone? No, because you're Team OnePlus, and we feel that we've already locked you in and we've got your money and we deserve your money, so we can put out whatever we want. But there's also something kind of intellectually honest about that. He's not backtracking. Well, he deleted his tweet, but it's not like they're redesigning the phone based on consumer feedback. This is the path moving forward. You can be on board, or you can get some other device, which your tribalism will probably emotionally prevent you from just jumping ship immediately from their perspective. Now, a company like LG has put out a conversation. They've garnered some phenomenal, respectful feedback. And if they take all that and just say, no, we still just decided to do a notch, even though all the questions we asked, people said that the notch was terrible, then that's going to view their contribution to the discussion as disingenuous. So there's a potential pitfall on both sides. With Carl Pei's solution of being forthright, being kind of blunt, and sort of taking a part of his audience for granted because of the tribalism aspect, then you run the risk of turning off some of your heavy users and pushing them towards a competitor's product. With LG, you garner goodwill up front, But then every customer who doesn't feel like they get what they want runs the risk of feeling disenfranchised. Well, I wrote this great post on Reddit to LG, and then they went and did something that I didn't want them to do. You know, there's a good chunk of people who are going to feel that way regardless. It won't matter. They'll feel like their concerns weren't taken seriously. So I understand the potential pitfalls, but I feel if LG really joins the conversation, listens to the consumers that are talking to them, then they'll weather this more gracefully than OnePlus did.
I mean, it's already set for the G7 if what we believe to have seen from, the leaks, the MWC showing, like it's going to have a notch. So, the best, it's all about spin control and damage control at this point.
Yeah,
But
but I mean, we
I
definitely
wanted,
need to just do the podcast for, like the iPhone 10 version of this podcast from now on. So I
all
really
right, well,
didn't take, people's usage into consideration. I have to apologize to all the people that watch our stream that I wasn't I wasn't taking, notchdom seriously. Obviously, this is what people want, and they're
yeah,
spending a
this
lot
is
of
what people
money
want. This
on
is actually what
notches
people want.
and seams and things like that, things that interrupt the screen. And if like that's what people want, I will be happy to give it to them. So that's the jam.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that we
People
could
just don't want to look at
finally
my face. So this is
finally
actually a good
clean all
use for
this.
the notch.
I'm
I
giving you
don't
my
need to be.
best side. That's also why someone asked, like, why is Juan all framed rule of thirds? Like, well, there's a reason coming up, and it's a terrible reason, but I'm having fun with it. So
Yeah. We're just going to abuse our cameras for a little bit, just trying to cover it up in different
and so
ways,
we,
in
we
ways
have
that don't benefit the listener at all.
we have
So
from Renato Laporte a mention of the P20 notch and how it can be sort of, hide the notch or have a default where it cuts into the screen. And a lot of people like to bring up the V10 and the V20 ticker displays, and that's not the same thing. The ticker display on a V10 or a V20 was an
was
additional
specifically
step
purposed.
expand on notifications and to provide shortcuts, and didn't cut into the active space that could be utilized for camera, for the viewfinder on your camera, for multimedia content, streaming videos. Apps didn't have to figure out how to work around any kind of cutout into the screen. It just provided additional space and shortcuts on top of it. It's not the same thing. Now, we would all agree that the V10 and the V20 were charmingly ugly phones. And asymmetry is a big deal when you have a ticker display that doesn't run the full length of the screen at the top. But the main viewing area and the main interaction space on those phones was not hampered by having a larger webcam. A selfie camera didn't alter my ability to full screen cinematically shot content, or to view full screen YouTube content with a crop, or to play some of my favorite older games, which aren't resolution or aspect ratio aware. Doesn't touch on any of that. So, ticker displays, not the same thing as a notch.
Mm. So there you have it. I don't know how we can transition over to this little piece of mail here at this point, but you know what? We might as well. So, into our March mailbag here, talking about a whole bunch of other topics, but we'll stay on the topic for the notch, with the notch, for just a second. Goran Petrovic asks, do you have any thoughts on Emil Protolinsky's VentureBeat column on buying only phones with headphone jacks and no notches? Also, can Juan explain exactly what are the benefits of USB-C audio over 3.5 millimeter in theory, and compare that with the reality? Thanks, guys. Goran. So let's talk about the VentureBeat article here first. The title is ProBeat, yay, headphone jacks, nay, notches. It's kind of this sort of not extremist, and not like actually being radical, but in terms of like going to the ends of the scale here. In terms of, well, if I want a phone these days, I'm going to have one without a freaking notch on it because I hate that. And I also want, the analog audio that I've always been used to. And it's these kinds of I don't, again, not to be pejorative, but like regressive kind of
Yeah,
like
Jules, do we have
things.
a link to that, like in the show notes, or at least on the YouTube video, where people can catch that?
Yeah, it's in the
It's the show
post.
notes that people can.
Yeah,
Okay,
the show
so
notes.
so this is, I mean, we're talking about an editorial, and we're talking about I can't Emil
Yep.
Protolinsky,
Yeah,
um,
he.
Emil's opinion on the state of the industry, and I think it lines up well with numerous enthusiasts. And so people who are more likely to judge an individual device across the entire market or across the entire ecosystem. So when like an Evan Bloss in EV Leaks, puts out a poll saying like, what do you think about notches? And 65% of the people that reply say they don't like notches. We're not getting a representation of consumers. We're getting a representation on smartphone fans who follow these kinds of conversations. To the main point, I agree. Until we get rid of the smartphone screen as the main interaction space, and what I want my phone to become is the brain, the battery, and the radios for an ecosystem of personal area networking equipment, better audio, better heads-up display tech, better body sensors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to have to keep looking at a phone screen for every interaction that I encounter when it comes to digital information. I completely agree. I would rather have nicer rectangle screens. I'm not offended by rounded corners on those rectangles, because usually that often falls into navigation space and it doesn't really impact my ability to see notifications. The list of crazy notifications that I never clear from the notification shade on my phone. It doesn't get in the way of the back, home, and multitasking buttons. Cutting the corners off in a Battlestar Galactica kind of way is far less offensive than cutting into the main display. The problem is we're not indicative of the bulk of sales. And so when we see a company like Apple sell a significant number of iPhone 10s, $1,000 phones, this phone sold really well. Don't let market analysts convince you otherwise. Don't let market analysts make you think that the iPhone 10 was a flop. It just didn't completely eclipse the iPhone 8. It's still one of the best selling phones of the last year. When other manufacturers see that you can disrupt the display to compromise the display for other sensors on the phone
And associate that with that
a
price tag.
$1,000 device, they're going to say, well, we can do some similar things. We can make our products less expensive. And that looks like success, so we can just copy it. So unfortunately, because of sort of this fashion brand, fashion label tribalism, if Samsung were to do this tomorrow, everyone who was complaining about the notch would grumble and still get their next Galaxy. If Samsung were to get rid of the 3.5 millimeter jack next year, a ton of people are going to grumble, and then they're still going to go and buy their Galaxy. You look at like Nexus to Pixel fans, similar types of behavior, and like, oh well, I learned to get around it, or I learned to deal with it, or maybe it wasn't as big a deal as I thought it was. That kind of lobster potting is pretty clear across the entire market. So I think we all just kind of have to get used to the notion that as enthusiasts, the individual things we cared about, like removable batteries, 3.5 millimeter headphone jacks, unmolested screens, are going to go away because consumers outspend us meteorically. It's just, exponentially more sales from general consumers who are tapped into an Apple Samsung ecosystem than enthusiasts who care about, more representation across the entire industry.
And you should have the option and the chance to exercise that in terms of your purchases while it's
Yeah,
still
I mean,
possible.
we say vote with your wallet, but that's also, like, do you want a flagship phone in 2018? How do you vote with your wallet to get a replaceable battery?
Mm.
If that's a feature you care about, there is no more voting with your wallet, because the bulk of consumers passed that by. They didn't care about it enough to fight for it. So
Now, what you
now
want to
we
do
all
with
have
your
to live with
wallet is go to the CNC factory and just place an order for a few thousand shells,
Or
and
I
then
mean, like, or take it to crowdfunding and see if we can make our own enthusiast phone and fight like every other smaller and upstart smartphone brand to try and bring
I mean,
something
there
to
is
the table.
Fairphone. They have their kind of replaceable, good for the environment kind of thing going on for them, where like every part is replaceable.
Well,
But
and
yeah,
the people that, again, I don't think it ever would have been a major consumer hit, but enthusiasts would love the idea of a truly modular phone. Being able to replace the screen on your own, being able to pick, camera and sound components, being able to
but
pick
that's
out.
just too much hassle for the regular consumer. I don't want to have to
I think
deal with
it's
that.
I think it's too confusing for the general consumer, but this might be a point where enthusiasts reclaim part of the discussion for themselves, just like PC builders do. Like we keep saying, we're in the post PC era, the death of the PC, and yet every year we see incredible things happen with gaming machines, with laptops, convertibles, foldable machines, blurring the lines between traditional computing and touch computing. Yesterday on Newegg Now, we got to play with the Hades Canyon Nook, the new ultra small form factor PC from Intel. We had 9 displays connected to it. We were running an HTC Vive Pro off of a box, which is about half the size, maybe even closer to a third the size of a PlayStation 4. And it's a full-fledged baller, powerful micro PC. I mean, we keep saying, oh yeah, PC's dead. This is the smartphone era. This is the mobile era. And yet incredible things keep getting released in that space. So there could be a company out there who could make a good faith argument to say, we're working on some way of creating driver support for Android, or maybe we'll go to Chrome OS. We'll make a Chrome phone because somehow maybe Chrome is better capable of detecting hardware differences. And then from there, ultra mobile, pick out every component and go to town with exactly the hardware build that you want.
I'm just going to port Fuchsia onto my laptop and that'll be it.
But that's such a good point though, is sorry, kind of brain fart there and then derailed and I'm trying to get back on track is look at the progress that's being made by Microsoft in supporting mobile chipsets. There's an end run around the current smartphone industry that Microsoft could do. This is way outside the league. This is not supported by any corporate evidence that Microsoft might be working on something like this. But if Windows 10 actually starts running well on ARM chipsets to the point where it's like seamless performance between a decently spec'd mid-range laptop and a Qualcomm 845, it wouldn't take much to revamp the Windows 10 UI, focusing on sort of the tablet touch mode that a lot of laptops have. The Qualcomm 845 is already going to come with LTE radios, and Windows is already really good at detecting hardware, knowing what drivers it needs to support a piece of hardware. Updates come directly from Microsoft. We could eventually find ourselves in a position yet again where Microsoft could make another play on the smartphone industry. This is the worst way to do it, and they've earned no goodwill, no trust with the way that they've handled phones in the past. But if you want that truly modular, I put it together myself, this is the perfect device because I made it for me, Windows 10 could be the best bet. I don't know. I mean, I don't see it coming from Google. Everything that I see coming from Google is restricting customization and some of that choice and trying to rein in their manufacturing partners so that Android is a more unified platform. You're definitely never going to get it from Apple. So who does that leave?
Yeah. Good segue, by the way. Thank you for that. With Zayn Shourbaji's email here.
Yeah.
Hey, podcast pimps. Do not call us podcast pimps, by the way. I was trolling Android P
We're only
comment
going to be called
sections.
podcast pimps now.
From now on, it will just be podcast pimps. Android podcast pimps. I was trolling Android podcast pimps comment sections. That doesn't sound like a good treat, by the way. And it seems like the vocal minority are up in arms over Android P. What is your opinion on some of the changes, like no rootless substratum, the theming app that you could use to get to the overlay manager, and or quick setting toggles being nerfed. Thank you, and keep up the texcapades, Zayn. So, there's been a change.org petition concerning this Android custom overlay controversy and how we're going after Adam Lazinski, who locked down this stupid little feature for no good reason at all. So, yeah, let's talk about that for a second.
Well, this is exactly what I'm getting at. And we've had some of these conversations in the past, both on this show, also when I've been on some other podcasts like Board at Work. We've gotten into some pretty brutal debates about some of these tactics. On the one hand, I think Google reining in Android is probably better for most consumers out there. I think that's unfortunately the future we need to face, where some of the wide open, Wild West nature of Android is no longer charming. The update situation on Android is not good, and we need to find ways to better distribute patches, bug fixes, security exploits, and full operating system updates. And we also need to start addressing the fact that we're making increasingly expensive devices that are kind of becoming more disposable, not less. Too much material, too much manpower, too much money goes into the creation of these things for them to be like year and a half, 2 year gadgets when consumers are trying to push their smartphone usage longer. And I feel corporations are doing a poor job of acknowledging this trend in user frugalness, instead making it more likely that your phone's going to get damaged or need to be replaced, or you're just not going to get software updates. And that's how you get the new software, is to buy a new $900 phone. That's not support. That's a poor excuse for support. And even our top players are guilty of some pretty poor track records on keeping their customers protected and up to date. So when it comes to these types of moves, again, we're looking at Google trying to pivot and trying to make Android less intimidating, more appealing. There's still a whole bunch of space where iOS can stomp on it. And one of the ways that you do that is you rein in enthusiast features. You rein in potential exploits. And anything that requires additional effort to support enthusiasts is probably something that's going to be on the chopping block over the next couple of years.
Yeah,
So
you make a good point there.
Google doesn't have any burning any burning consideration for theming features that maybe 0.05% of Android users are going to take advantage of. How much developer resource and how much developer support should they extend, knowing that of those 0.05, they're also probably going to have to handle some support calls from people who somehow managed to screw something up. You can never completely anticipate every user action or every user complaint, and even minor things which take up time suddenly starts to make that look less and less and less attractive to Google as an outlet. So why have a dark theme? You can kind of just match the wallpaper. If they have a dark wallpaper, then sure, some elements of the phone will also darken up a little bit. Good enough. That's all you need. You don't need anything else. It's touch square, get app. It's the exact same metaphor that we've used since Xerox invented sort of GUIs. And
but you don't have to touch square. You can touch like a squircle or like some beautifully drawn element that has vectors in its space, and you don't have to actually and that's what these people are arguing for. Now, what I will say, and
no, it's funny. I'm sorry, Jules. It's hilarious though that you said it doesn't have to be a square. I'm sorry. This is a tangent. It's not related to what you're talking about. We'll get back on track. My V30 finally got its Oreo update, and so I run Nova Launcher, and I customized all of my icons, and I went with circles. And for whatever reason, Oreo, even though it kept Nova Launcher as my launcher, changed all of my icons to squares. So according to Oreo, it will be touch square again.
It will be touch square. And
Google has decided I was wrong for wanting circles on my Nova Launcher. I digress. I apologize. I didn't mean to do there. It was just funny.
No. It gets to the point here because, and this, when you're talking about Android P or Android Oreo post March, just reverting all these changes, including the overlay manager service. Just the one paragraph here from the change.org petition against Adam Lisinski or for Adam Lisinski, whatever, Google to reinstate the overlay manager service. It is no small feat. It's a constant running service in the background of your device to allow for resource replacements on target packages. Stop right there. Background processes are getting a real good thrashing, not just in Android, but in the whole of the mobile space, but just because it's not just, it could be just for one service that's internal and whatnot, but it could be hijacked for more elevated privileged information and other kinds of things to go on with your sensors and hardware and whatnot. And given the concerns that we've had over Facebook and over other such like targets, just being able to exploit these background processes, including smart home or like apps that record your voice and or record TVs and like serve you ads based on what they listen to, like that's a big deal. So like they don't have to say anything. It's the, even though it's the AOSP Garrett, they don't have to necessarily be open about the reasons for why they're doing whatever they're doing, but like you take into consideration the whole of the environment and not just the fact that Android is free and we're waving our US flag because that's the sign of freedom. And like it seems like liberty, libertarians.
It's like, no, you didn't need your own phone.
Politics
in Google Sandbox. And so, first of all, the amount of effort and energy that went into creating even this change.org petition is going to amount to nothing. I don't believe petitions in the slightest sway corporate or political opinions from people who actually matter as decision makers. What we're left with, and again, because we couldn't keep Microsoft in the fight, I shouldn't say it that way. Microsoft couldn't keep themselves in the fight. Consumers were right to walk away from Windows Phone, even if we enthusiasts found a lot to like there. And I'm still going to point to Windows Phone 8.1 as being one of my all-time favorite UIs, and just performance, customization, everything was so much better than the compromises you would have to make in Android or in iOS at the time. But now we're stuck with two players. So you either get a Google or you either get an Apple. They're not going to change their behavior. They've got, the majority of the consumer base locked up. Not until, saying vote with your wallet is entirely disingenuous, because what store are you going to go to? Oh, you don't like the customization options that we have on Android? Well, you're going to hate iOS even more. Like there's no safe harbor for you there. Your options are going to be increasingly to do things like root and get into less consumer friendly ways of extracting the information or the UI elements that you want and customizing them yourself. And if that's a solution that's fine for you, great. But for the few consumers who are maybe interested in some of that ability but didn't want to have to completely crack open their phones to do it, they're just going to move on. They're just going to get on with their lives. It probably wasn't going to be as burning a concern for them, and will increasingly entrench the tribalism of the Google users and the iPhone users, and that's going to continue
and
going.
the word of the day is tribalism.
Yeah, no, it's been a big deal part of the conversation for a lot of things over these last couple of weeks in news, in tech news, and in entertainment news. And so, like voting with your wallet would mean like, are you going to go to Sailfish? Are you going to go to some kind of Linux? Are you going to see Firefox OS on a phone? Well, no, because instantly a ton of tech reviewer elites will say, oh, but it's not good enough. Oh, it's not ready. Oh, it doesn't do this. Oh, you can't do that. And you're never going to jump on board. If we had listened to the first generation reviews from the original Microsoft Surface, the Surface should have died. It was a terrible product. How could anyone like that? No, this is horrible. In Windows 8, it's completely unusable. You can't do anything on it. Well, it took like 3 years of losing in the marketplace of ideas for Microsoft to find footing with general consumers to say that the Surface Pro was a great idea. And now look at the insane number of variations on that same idea that we have today. They had to ignore and lose in the market all that time to get there. And I don't see any company with the fortitude to really make that shift right now. Everyone's trying to play it safe, which is why I feel we need to see some more aggressive disruption away from the phone itself. The next time you see AR goggles, the next time you see a heads-up display, the next time you see better voice interactions, better headsets, better audio, give it a shot, because that's actually what's going to pull us out of this tech malaise. That's actually what's going to move the needle on improving our interaction with data and services, and not just holding in the same pattern that we've been in for the last 4 generations of smartphone, maybe 5. If I can go back to a Galaxy Note 4 and still feel totally well served by that experience, how far have we really progressed? Can I shoot 4K video? Do I have a quad HD display? Do I have great battery life? I don't have water resistance, but I can replace the battery myself because I'm a grown up and I should be able to do those things. Pen touch, fine point controls, great build quality. It's fine. That phone still holds up today. So what are we doing? What amazing advancements have we seen since the Note 4 that really changed the discussion on how we use data and services? And I can't really point to many.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad.
I'm mad as heck, and I'm not gonna take it anymore. For you are messing with the primal forces of nature, and you will.
Oh man. All right. By the way, we didn't forget Goran's second question here, which is the benefits of USB-C audio over 3.5 in theory and in reality.
So USB-C audio is a double-edged sword. Right now, it's not consistently employed. So like some dongles, like this is one of the things that frustrates me. I really like the Mate 10 Pro. I really do like that phone. I miss having a built-in headphone jack, but Huawei wasn't really known for the best headphone jacks. Like they were usually mid-pack at best, sometimes even more mediocre. But the thing that is super annoying about the Mate 10 Pro is this dongle does not have a DAC. This dongle will not be recognized as a USB audio device on other technology products. So I can plug this into the Thunderbolt port on my laptop or on another phone with a USB-C port, and this headphone jack does not show up. That confuses the consumer market because this is a universal port because it has to plug into the bottom of the phone, but it's proprietary to one line of devices. I think this will work on a Motorola. I think they used the same pinout so that the Motorola dongle and the Huawei dongle will talk to each other. That's not a good ecosystem partner if you're looking at what's going to be most compatible. But what is frustrating is if you take Huawei's headphones do have a DAC built into them. So the dongle won't work on any other devices if you want to use your own headphones, but you can take the Huawei, and they use the really terrible earpod style design. You take that dongle and you plug it into my laptop or you plug it into another phone, and it does show up as a USB audio device. Ultimately, if we're going to get rid of the 3.5 millimeter jack, there's give and take. So pro and con. The con is we lose a great universal phono jack. This is one of the last true universal standards. It's a true standard that everyone could participate with. And the licensing, there wasn't any. It's not like how you have to license a lightning connector from Apple to make your Apple accessories. And there's just decades and decades and decades of amazing products that you can take part in, headphones and speakers and different connectors and stuff that can plug directly into these devices and deliver truly fantastic performance when properly supported. The flip side to that is this opens up the potential for audio manufacturers to take the discussion to consumers directly. So let's say all you can afford is like a $200 phone, but you scrimped and saved for a great pair of headphones. Chances are really low that that $200 phone is going to properly drive your investment in a nice pair of headphones. But let's say those headphones were from a company like Sennheiser. If Sennheiser made a pair of USB-C headphones, it wouldn't matter what device you took those headphones to. It could be a $200 phone, it could be a $1,000 phone, but you would trust that Sennheiser had delivered the audio hardware to properly drive that experience, and you could plug it directly into the bottom of the phone and you're good to go. And that would have probably a higher longevity than Bluetooth because you don't have to worry about a battery. It's powered directly off the battery of the device, not having a Bluetooth wireless battery. So you spend $200 on a cabled pair of headphones, but with an amazing DAC tailor fit exactly to those headphones is a better solution long-term than having another wireless thing that you have to charge every night. So again, it's a little complicated still right now, but it is getting better. A lot of new USB products coming out are more universal. Google, it was a step in the right direction. The dongle for the Pixel 2 is pretty good. It's not nearly as terrible as the headphone jack was on the first generation Pixel. The dongle on Pixel 2 is noticeably better than the headphone jack on Pixel 1. So Pixel 1, more convenient. You don't ever have to worry about losing your dongle, but audio quality, noticeably poorer. So what do you want? Do you want the convenience of sound tracking? Then you want something with a Pixel with a built-in jack. If you want a higher quality experience, you go with the dongle. Lastly, I should just sort of clarify. Again, on just sort of my personal escapades, I've been trying to talk more about like lifestyle and fitness and health and things like that, just adjacent to the world of technology. And the beginning of this week, I sat down with one of the top audiologists in the country, and I have a recorded interview where I ask her some questions about recent trends in teen, young adult, and adult hearing loss. Trends that correlate with the rise of smartphones over the last 10 years. And we're seeing significant degradation at younger and younger ages from people who are heavy consumers of audio. And I asked her point blank about the different types of headphones that people can buy. So like intraoral earbuds, cans, and earpod style designs. And spoiler alert, the commentary on earpod style headphones probably isn't the most flattering for a company like Apple as it pertains to how valuable you think your hearing is to you. So if your hearing isn't worth more than the absolutely crap, nearly disposable headphones that came included with your phone, then you're fine. If you just don't value your health or your ability to hear things into your 30s and 40s, then you're good. Just keep using that.
But also keep your volume down, and you'll be fine anywhere you go.
Well,
so
it's a half-hour conversation. I mean, you can find it if you search for my own personal stuff, because it kind of goes hand in hand with some of the things that we're talking about here. So I think this helps join the conversation, and it's not just me guessing what might be better or worse from you. This is she has a focus in pediatrics. She's one of the top audiologists in the country, and she's the director of the audiology department at UCLA. So there's enough,
you would hope that she's knowing
respect that she's she knows what she's talking about. And this is something that I don't feel a number of companies have properly addressed. We're going to give you a pair of headphones. Wow, how convenient, how great. Depending on what you're using, how they fit, and what you listen to, and how you listen to that stuff, you're just going to train yourself to listen in ways which will permanently damage your hearing. Any damage done to the ear is irrevocable. Your ear does not heal. It just feels better after it acclimates to the damage that's been done. So this is not good for future generations of consumers, because we're training them with these types of products to listen in unhealthy ways. And we're saying it's a benefit, but I digress. It's a half-hour conversation. You can catch it. Dr. Allison Grimes, Some Gadget Guy, Smartphones and Hearing Loss. You can find me on your favorite podcast catchers right alongside the Pocketnow Weekly.
Promotion.
Self-promotion.
And speaking of promotion, I'm going to refrain from comment for this last email here, which was truncated for length. But Renato Laporte goes on to write, Google is the one and only to blame for the fall and continuous sinking of Android Wear OS. This was from 2 weeks ago when we were
really
debating about
we had 2 weeks
a
ago.
really aggressive debate about who was to blame for the collapse of Android Wear's popularity, Google or the OEMs. And I was taking the position of the OEMs, where everyone else, for right or wrong, chose Google. Now, Renato Laporte has been on the Google side of things to blame, and he continues on to say that Google's the one that's the one and only to blame. End of the discussion. Keep up the good work.
Ding.
Just kidding. So, and I've bullet pointed a bunch of things here, so I'll try and get through these quick. I had a Huawei watch on for a day earlier this year, and I couldn't believe what I saw, that Android Wear has had the same flaws and shortcomings of when I've used it for the first time in 2015. The hardware was on point for me. Lovely design, nice display, and I can live with charging one more gadget every day. The software is a disaster. How it looks, how it performs, the possibilities of what I'm able to do, the navigation, everything is terrible. Well, Google made it possible for Android OEMs to adopt the Android framework to their liking. No one can deny that we've basically got TouchWiz or MIUI wars, with the typical fight over software update schedules and bloatware. Traditional watchmakers that have boarded the sinking ship are here because there is no other option. They don't have the knowledge or the means to create and maintain a whole new ecosystem for themselves. Samsung's Tizen framework might be closed for now, but if they ever open it, Google should watch out. Peace. So yeah, just a few more thoughts about wearables to digest, as I've been trying to digest for this week. Like this has been a very huge week for us here.
Yeah,
so
this was a lot of news this week.
mhm. So we want to thank you for going through this with us, and for keeping us in your thoughts here as we discuss the major thoughts in things. I can't even say things. I've had trouble this week just trying to put my thoughts together, and yeah, that's all I'm going to say.
Well, and I think on that note, we should probably just wrap this up, because just realized we're getting on almost
More
2
than 90
hours of
minutes now.
podcast. Again, you can head on over to pocketnow.com, catch all of the top stories here. We'll have links to a lot of the stuff, and also we'll try and include the viewer questions, just so you can kind of get into some of the discussion yourselves. I'll be really curious, like I said, to hear some of your guys' thoughts on the different conversations that were held between LG and OnePlus this week, and just like this was a kind of a controversial week for news in general. So in the education market, who do you think is tackling the future of tech and education well? And of course, make sure you tune into the Pocketnow Daily, hosted by our chief technologist, Jaime Rivera. He's got all of the individual stories that you're going to want to talk about on tap every day. Just where you can catch all of the fun conversations that we're having, in addition to reviewing the latest and greatest in smartphones, tablets, and wearables. So, folks, there you have it. The Pocketnow Weekly is done this week. The show is over, but the conversation continues, where Jules is at Point Jules, and I'm humbly at Some Gadget Guy on the Twitters. Pocketnow is around the web on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Google+, YouTube, all around that web. Our home site, pocketnow.com. And for Spanish speakers, definitely check out es.pocketnow.com. Shows like this cannot exist without your support. Sharing the weekly with your friends who love mobile technology, and dropping reviews on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever else you can review podcasts. Just kind of help us keep that ranking up there, so more people can discover the show and join the conversation. Once again, we want to thank this week's sponsors, the Google Cloud platform, and the podcast Breach. They're helping us keep the lights on, but ultimately there wouldn't be a show if it weren't for our listeners and subscribers who have kept us on the air since 2012. The Pocketnow Weekly will be back next week with all kinds of delicious technology, so make sure you tune back in. What can your data tell you? With Google Cloud Platform, use machine learning at scale to build better products. It predicts, so your business can thrive. Click now to learn more about Google Cloud Platform, or visit g.co/getcloudai.